Kev wanted to share. Kevin, if you could teach us a little bit about it, or tell us what you...
Okay, so Yom HaZikaron, Yom is day, HaZikaron is the day of remembrance, which is, it's always the day before Yom HaAtzmaut, and the week after Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Day, which was last week, and it's to commemorate people that have lost their lives in defending the country and in terrorist attacks. So it's not only the soldiers and the people that sacrificed their lives over the years since pre-independence, and security forces, as even people who got killed in terrorist attacks. It's to commemorate their memory. And I know at Yeshiva College and possibly at Sydenham, they have a great, I shouldn't say great, a meaningful ceremony. And they light candles, and I used to go. So if Yeshiva College should have, and they always have a guest speaker, and they have a video link.
Yeah, I'm sure there's something going on this year as well there.
So Yeshiva College always, Sydenham may have, I'm not, also may have, probably not. Sydenham and Yeshiva's College is not far from you guys.
Yeshiva College generally has something. Kevin, can you?
And it's very meaningful. It's very well done, and it's.
And I hope the learning is in memory of the fallen, not only the fallen soldiers, but every person that gave their life for the protection of Eretz Israel and who died in terrorism for being a Jew. And I hope the shiurim that we give provide an aliyah for their neshama. Teach us, Kevin, halacha.
Amen.
Wait 1 second before you start. Just I saw a figure on the daily paper, J-Post. It said that since the inception of the state of Israel, through terrorist attacks, through Shin Bet, through all the different, through the Mossad and through the IDF, they've lost just over 24,000 something people. So it's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. Thank you, Gav. Teach us, Kev.
Yeah.
Thanks, Devin. Thank you.
Okay. So the next question we're going to deal with here is reheating cooked food. We did adding water to cholent. Okay, and actually we didn't do that. Let's say adding water to cholent. Apologies. So the question is it permitted to add boiling water to cholent which is completely cooked, so that the cholent does not dry up or burn? That's like if you prepare it on Friday afternoon, you put it on you leave it on with a timer to keep that it's still hot, and by the time Shabbos day comes, Shabbos lunch, you're ready to serve it. So it depends. If the heat source on which the cholent pot rests is not completely covered for Shabbos, then it is forbidden to add boiling water to the cholent. Thus, it is forbidden to add boiling water to cholent in a crock pot whose heating element is not properly covered. To a cholent which is placed inside an oven, or to a cholent placed on a range without a blech. If, however, the heat source is completely and properly covered, it is permitted to add boiling water to the cholent. The boiling water must be poured from either a plugged-in Shabbos urn or from a kettle which is placed on a blech, but not from water that has been stored in a thermos from Erev Shabbos, even if the water is still piping hot. Preferred method for doing so is as follows. Remove the lid of the cholent pot, lift up the pot and hold it in the air or balance it partially on a surface. Wait a moment or two to allow most of the hot steam to escape, and then pour the boiling water directly from the urn or kettle into the pot. Put the cover back on the pot and then return the pot to the properly covered range oven or crock pot. Okay, let's leave it at that because there's other questions on this. So we can do this tomorrow.
All right. So guys, I'm going to get cracking. The first thing I'm going to do is share the screen that we have, and I would like to give Arthur the honors just to read the Mishna. Give me 1 second. This is for your refuah, specifically because of your ribs, etc. So I think you need it in terms of, may it help you have a refuah, specifically.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Let me zoom in. I'm on my phone.
Just we haven't done this for a while, eh?
I know, this has been the longest previous Mishnah we've done ever. in Bava Kamma. It was the longest.
Okay. If the fact that one stolen ox or sheep was established by the testimony of two witnesses, and the fact that he then slaughtered and sold the stolen animal was established by their testimony as well, or by the testimony of two other witnesses, he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. The Mishna continues. If one stole an ox or sheep and then sold it on the Sabbath, or if one stole an ox or sheep and sold it for idolatry, or if one stole an ox or a sheep and then slaughtered and sold and slaughtered only to Yom Kippur, or if one stole the ox and sheep from his father and then slaughtered or sold it, and his father died afterwards, or if one stole an ox or a sheep and slaughtered it and then consecrated the slaughtered animal, in all these cases he pays fourfold and fivefold payment.
Fourfold or fivefold, not both.
Yeah, fourfold or fivefold payment.
Perfect.
If one stole an ox or a sheep and then slaughtered it to use for the meat for therapeutic purposes, or as food for dogs, or if he slaughters it and it is found to be treif, I'm assuming that's what it means, okay, or if he slaughters it as a non-consecrated animal in the temple's courtyard, in all these cases he pays fourfold or fivefold payment. Rishon exempts him from the fourfold or fivefold payment if those in the last two cases.
Perfect. Okay, so let's just examine this piece by piece. Well read off. So if the fact that one stole an ox or a sheep was established by the testimony of two witnesses, and the fact that he then slaughtered or sold the stolen animal was established by their testimony as well, or by the testimony of two other witnesses, he pays the fourfold or fivefold. So what we're going to be going through in the Mishnah is they're two separate acts, guys. The one is an act of thievery, and the other one is the act where the four or fivefold payment kicks in for slaughtering or selling the animal. So we're going to learn, does it have to be the same witnesses that observe the thievery as being able to have to observe either a slaughtering or selling? It's not slaughtering and selling. It's either the animal is then slaughtered or it's sold alive. If it's slaughtered and then sold, it doesn't really make sense for one reason, is that you're not paying the fourfold and the fivefold. So there's either a fourfold for the sheep or the fivefold payment for the ox. So just bear in mind here, it says the fourfold or the fivefold, but it mentions the ox or the sheep. So just remember that there's no fivefold for the sheep. There's a fivefold for the ox, because it has more dignity to walk out an ox when you're stealing it, as opposed to putting a smelly sheep on your back, at which you don't have to pay such a heavy penalty, because the humiliation alone has taken some of the kapora, almost the atonement aspect, because of the embarrassment. So just link the fourfold to the sheep and the fivefold to the ox. For some reason, the Mishnah's got it the other way around. Does that make sense, guys? So that's number one. And number two, just remember, this is a case of saying, do the witnesses have to be the same witnesses that observed the stealing compared to the fact that the animal was slaughtered or sold? Because with stealing, you pay double, and with slaughtering or selling, you pay the fourfold or fivefold payment. Does that make sense? You don't pay the twofold and the fourfold or fivefold. You either pay the twofold for standard theft, or you pay the fourfold or fivefold if there's slaughtering or selling of the animal. Okay, so that's that first part that we're going to be going through. The second part we're going to go through now is if one stole an ox or a sheep and then sold it on the Sabbath, on Shabbat. So what's the big deal as far as this is concerned? Well, the main issue that you're dealing is we're dealing with an issue that we learned in Sanhedrin at first. I think Gavin was there. Kim lei b'di rabba minei. Does anybody remember what that is? I know Gavin knows because we did it in Sanhedrin, but will any of you guys take a go what Kim lei b'di rabba minei means?
Leib is heart.
No,
B'di rabba.
no, Kim lei b'di rabba minei.
Oh, is it one word? Okay.
No,
Kim
it's this
lei.
phrase. Kim lei b'di rabba minei. All right. So Kim lei b'di rabba minei means one is subject only to the penalty greater than it.
Oh, that's right.
What that means is that one who simultaneously commits a capital offense and a lesser offense, for example, is liable only to the death penalty and not to the usual penalty for the lesser offense. So, for example, if a thief slaughters a stolen animal on the Sabbath, right, he won't be liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment, since the liability for that payment, okay, incurred while committing a capital offense, which means when he slaughtered the animal in the Sabbath, he was subject to the death penalty, and therefore we waiver the lesser amount of the financial penalty. So our Mishnah teaches that although a thief who slaughters a stolen animal on Shabbat is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment, a thief who sells the stolen animal on Shabbos has not committed a capital offense. So Arthur, that's very interesting. You have to discern between a slaughtering and a selling on Shabbat. The one is a capital offense, the other one is not. Guys, are you...
Explain the second one, why it's not.
Well, it's not, you shouldn't do business transactions, etc., but it's not a death penalty offense.
One is murder and one is not murder.
Yeah, well, no, it's not because it's murder, because murder, you're right, is a capital offense, but we're talking about a murder of an animal. There are 39 categories of melacha, including as you giving sacrifice, killing an animal, etc. That's a prohibition that if you commit on the Sabbath is a death penalty, but not selling an animal. That's only rabbinically prohibited. So therefore, if you sell the animal after you stole it, you're subject to the four or fivefold payment in that case, because there's no kim lei b'di rabba minei. One's not getting the death penalty like one is if you slaughter an animal on the Sabbath, and therefore then the financial penalty would have been waived in that capital case. But since there's no capital case with selling the animal that you stole, you still have to pay the four or fivefold penalty. Guys, it's pretty clear. It's not difficult. Do you get that, guys?
Yeah. That's clever, that.
Okay, so then there's that other issue is, and then sold it for idolatry. Now, when I read that at first, the first thing that you should think of, oh, well, idolatry is a capital offense.
Yeah.
Why would you pay the four or fivefold payment if it's kim lei b'di rabba minei? Because the thief is getting the death penalty for idolatry. So why would he then pay the four or fivefold payment? So we have to again, Arthur, distinguish between slaughtering and selling. If a thief slaughters a stolen animal for a sacrifice for idolatry, he gets the death penalty, and then he's exempt from the four or fivefold payment since he's committed a capital offense, and the lower offense is waived. But a thief who sells the stolen animal for idolatrous purposes, in other words, he might be selling it to a non-Jew or even a Jew, he's not involved in the idolatry himself. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't want to be that guy in the next world. But it's certainly not a death penalty case. And therefore, since he has not committed a capital offense, he's liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. You get it, guys? So again, if you slaughter an animal or you slaughter on the Sabbath or you do so for part of idol worship, death penalty, then you don't pay the four or fivefold payment. If it's just sold on the Sabbath or sold for idolatrous practices, in that case, there's no death penalty, and the thief is subject to the 4 or 5-fold payment. I thought I'd just add some clarity there for you guys. Now, if one stole an ox or a sheep and then slaughtered it on Yom Kippur, okay, what do you think the penalty is there?
I would think death as well.
The same as Shabbos.
Okay, so I thought exactly the same, guys, because Yom Kippur, you must know the halachas of Yom Kippur are as stringent as Shabbat. It's not seen as a normal Yom Tov. It's far more stringent. Far more stringent. It's like a Shabbat in compared to halacha. So I thought for sure the person gets the death penalty. But it's not the case. It's actually slaughtering on Yom Kippur is a kares-based offense. A person gets karet. Spiritual excision.
That's even more.
No.
That's even more serious.
It might be, well, it's not in the sense that it might be, but generally all death penalty cases get kares, unless as far as I know, that getting the death penalty, if done with proper teshuvah, can remove the kares aspect. But generally the two are linked unless there's a proper teshuvah to the death penalty case. But the two are generally linked. In other words, if somebody does a proper teshuvah and they get the death penalty, I don't think there's kares then. It doesn't, as far as I know. But if they don't do a proper teshuvah, they get death penalty and kares. The two are linked. But slaughtering on Yom Kippur is purely karet-based offense, spiritual excision. So nevertheless, he's liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. So you might want to ask why. Because according to the Tana of our Mishna, the rule is kimle b'di rabba mineh, one is subject only to the greater penalty, applies only when the greater penalty is court imposed on earth. It's a death penalty imposed on earth, not where it's described as less severe divinely imposed penalty of kares. So when Rashi says the less severe divine penalty, we mean less severe in this world, because it looks as though the person's getting away with it, but they're not. In other words, the bottom line you've got to remember, if it's court-imposed death penalty on earth, there's kimle b'di rabba mineh. But if there's a spiritual excision, that's not something they can try on earth. So therefore, since there's no trial as far as that's concerned, then the capital offense doesn't waiver the financial lesser offense. You still have to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. So that for me was a learning curve, guys, just as a matter of interest. I didn't know that. Okay. So then we learn the next part. Or if one stole an ox or sheep from his father and then slaughtered or sold it, and his father died afterwards. Okay. So you've got to distinguish between two cases. So if the son slaughtered or sold it during his father's lifetime, when the son had not yet inherited any part of it, he's liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment because he's stealing from his father. Believe me, Shemaim is responsible for far more. I mean, who steals from their father? Okay? But the point of it is he's certainly liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold payment. Stealing from your father doesn't get the death penalty. I'm sure it's not amusing upstairs. But it doesn't get the death penalty. It's just stealing. It's heavy, but it's... So then there's a 4 or 5-fold payment. So you're saying, well, why when the father dies is there no 4 or 5-fold payment? And there's a very logical reason. If the son slaughters or sells the animal after his father's death, the son would have inherited it. So he'd be exempt from paying the 4-fold or 5-fold payment because he's slaughtering his own animal. Technically, he's going to inherit it, right? And he's saying at the point at which the father dies, because before that anything could happen. The father could write him out of his will, his father could outlive him. But at the point where the father dies, if it's still in the estate and he slaughters it or sells it, it's his. He doesn't have to pay a 4 or 5-fold payment to the estate. He gets it. If he has siblings, he has to pay his brother for the share of the animal, but not the 4 or 5-fold that he's selling or slaughtering. Does that make sense, guys? That's a commentary according to Rashi. Yes,
Yeah,
guys, makes sense? Okay, you're not seeing me during the shiur because I want you to read the Mishna while I'm explaining it to you guys. That's why you're not
seeing. This is good.
I'm saying, okay, so if one stole an ox or a sheep and slaughtered it and then consecrated the slaughtered animal. Okay? So as far as that's concerned, that's in contrast to a thief who first consecrated the stolen animal and then slaughtered or sold it. So remember, we learned in the 74th Mishna, well, you're going to learn in the 74th Mishnah. There are two distinct cases. Either you can consecrate a stolen animal and then decide to sell it to somebody else or slaughter it or whatever the case may be, or you can steal it first in its living state. So the wording is, if one stole an ox or sheep and then slaughtered it and then consecrated the slaughtered animal, in all those cases he pays the 4 or 5-fold payment. Okay? So we're saying why? Because he was eligible to that 4 or 5-fold payment the minute he stole the animal. We did learn in a case that there was a disagreeing opinion in last Mishnah. Do you remember that when he consecrated the animal, he's no longer eligible for the 4 or 5-fold payment? Remember, guys, we did it last session. Yeah. But that's only according to some opinions. In other cases, he sells it after, he consecrated after he stole it. He's liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold. So it's only if the original owner wanted to consecrate it himself, he's off the hook for the 4 or 5-fold. We said. But in other cases where the original owner didn't, he has to pay the 4 or 5-fold. And there are opinions that say that if he consecrated the animal, he's not liable for the 4 or 5-fold. So the Tana of this Mishnah disagrees with the Tana of the previous Mishnah. That you can see. Because the previous Mishnah that Reish Lakish used as a proof basically said that if he consecrates the animal, he wouldn't be liable to the 4 or 5-fold. Otherwise, you would learn he's liable to the 4 or 5-fold. That was Rav Yochanan's argument. Remember. So this Tana is of a different opinion. Okay. So, yeah, okay, sure. Talk to me.
So I think it's a nice way to remember.
Yeah.
If the thief stole it and is still in his possession, 2-fold payment.
Yes.
I just thought of that now. If he sells it or slaughters it, then he pays 4 or 5.
Exactly. That's an ideal way to remember. It's as simple as that, Kev. Simple as that, but genius. Perfect. The simplicity of that is absolute fact. Perfect. So if one stole an ox or a sheep and then slaughtered it to use the meat for therapeutic purposes. So what do we mean therapeutic purposes? In other words, he's not using the meat for food. He's using it for medicine, whether he needs it as the protein content to eat. In other words, not primarily to enjoy a steak, but he needs protein, or maybe there's a fat on the animal that he's got boils, or who the heck knows what. Or as food for dogs, okay? In other words, the human being's not getting direct food benefit from it. Or if he slaughters it and is found to be a treifa, okay, as far as that's concerned, what do we mean? We mean treifa, Arthur was right. When he read the word treif, you can't eat an animal that's treifa. That becomes treif. That's where we get the word treif from. But Arthur, what happens is we also learn in Gemara Sanhedrin. Are you there, Arthur? There's something I want to tell you about Sanhedrin. Arthur, are you there? Can you unmute? Oh, gosh.
I've got my headphones on, Damon. I'm busy cleaning. I'm going back to work at 8 o'clock.
No, I get you. I just want to know sometimes you're with me.
I'm listening. The word treifa, and I was right. I know. I am right.
Okay,
I'm always right.
no, you're right. But all right, what else is a treifa? What is the actual definition of a treifa?
Something that is treif.
No, not at all. You can't.
Can I help you?
Because
I also know this one.
You
Kevin
can't
knows.
eat it because
Kevin, you got it. You know it.
Just hang on, guys.
Hasn't been slaughtered properly. That's it.
No. That's a different.
Nevela. So is that
that's
Nevela?
That's Nevela.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's brilliant. So Nevela.
Oh no. That the organs aren't kosher. The organs are not.
Exactly. So Arthur,
defective.
Defective, yeah.
Exactly. So Arthur, there's something that becomes treif can either be caused by nevela or treifa. Okay? So nevela is basically if it's not slaughtered correctly in the ritual slaughtering method. If it falls and breaks its neck, for example, you can't eat it, it's treif. But treifa and treif are similar in that if it's treifa, you can't eat it, it becomes treif. But treifa means that, and we learn this in Sanhedrin, it's an animal or a human being suffering from, in an animal's case, they're one of 18 specific fatal defects, okay? Listed by the Mishna in the 3rd chapter of Chulin. Chulin is another Gemara. Drive you a little crazy, mate. Trust me with the detail. But it basically states 18 factors that make an animal prohibited for slaughtering or eating. Its meat is not kosher. And that's in Exodus Shmot chapter 22, verse 30. It's there. But it mentions it in the 3rd chapter of Chulin. And with a human being, we discussed in Sanhedrin with Gavin and Rav Simcha Steinhauer, treifa meaning a person that's on their way out. They've got like 4th stage cancer or something like that, or they've got a few days left to live. You can't expedite their death by even a moment by giving them morphine and certain other drugs. That's some of the cases we learn because according to certain opinions, one's responsible for their death. And according to other opinions, you certainly hasten their death if not responsible for it in full. So that's a human treifa. But it's the bottom line is because of the animal would have died on its own eventually, you can't eat it. And when we learn it in Sanhedrin, you can't hasten a person's death with morphine. Does that make sense? You can manage pain, but you can't hasten the death. All right, so that's what a treifa is. So if it's, or if he slaughters it and it's found to be a treifa, or if he slaughters it as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard. So what are we talking about as far as that's concerned? Is that an unconsecrated animal that is slaughtered in the temple courtyard cannot be eaten. That's the bottom line. So we're learning about cases where a human being doesn't get benefit from consumption. Slaughtered for therapeutic purposes, food for dogs, slaughters it and it's found to be treifa where a person can't consume it. Slaughtered it as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard, you can't eat it. In all those cases, you still pay the 4 or 5-fold payment, okay? In other words, although the animal in those last 4 cases were not slaughtered for eating, it's nevertheless deemed a slaughter with respect to the 4-fold and 5-fold payment, okay? So we learn there that it's not about benefit for a human's food consumption. It's the act itself. Rabbi Shimon exempts him from the 4 or 5-fold payment in these last 2 cases. So in other words, if an animal is found to be treifa, in that particular case, Rabbi Shimon says there's no 4 or 5-fold payment. I suppose because you might discover after you slaughter it legitimately that you can't use it, and in which case there's no 4 or 5-fold, I'm assuming. And then if he slaughters it as a non-consecrated animal in the temple courtyard, I'm not sure what his reason is in that particular case. But you should know in Chulin, in the 85th daf, Rabbi Shimon basically derives through exegesis, I don't even know how to pronounce that word, in the Chumash, that when the Torah refers to the word slaughter, it refers to a slaughter that renders the animal permitted for consumption. So Rabbi Shimon maintains that the 4 and 5-fold payment for stealing and slaughtering a sheep or an ox doesn't apply if the slaughter doesn't render the animal permitted for consumption. So in the last 2 cases of the Mishnah, the thief slaughtered a treifa or unconsecrated animal in the temple courtyard, and the animal is forbidden for consumption. So what was the point? So therefore the thief is not liable for the 4 or 5-fold payment. It's different in the case of a dog. Why? Because a dog, you're feeding your animal. There's a benefit for that because you need to feed your animals. There's another benefit for medicinal purposes. Why? Because if it's healing you, there's a benefit. So there's no question as far as that's concerned. Do you get what I'm saying, guys?
I think it's put there as well, so these guys can't make up these stories either. So they're always basically responsible.
Yeah, but Rabbi Shimon is just making another point, is that if there's no purpose to your action, you don't have to pay the 4 or 5-fold payment. And I mean, we've seen this before with the case where there's a destructive act done on Shabbat. In other words, there's no point to it. It doesn't. It's rabbinically prohibited, but it doesn't contain a death penalty like a constructive act. Do you know what I'm saying? When I say destructive, I mean you're doing it. If the destructive act has a purpose, it's constructive. Okay, what I mean, if you're putting out a fire, that's destroying the fire. It's deconstructing the fire, but it's in order that the house doesn't burn down. But if it's a pointless act, like you're just lighting a fire and you don't do anything with it, I don't know if it's necessarily subject to the death penalty or not. There has to be an element of constructiveness to it, that you've got to cook the food or whatever. In terms of Kim Leber di Rabba Minay, the one issue is that one doesn't just get the death penalty unless there's a warning about that there will be a death penalty that would ensue. Hasroa, which is like warning, there's witnesses, etc. It's not like the death penalty is just given. And with Kim Leber di Rabba Minay, it has to be in the same time frame. It has to be exactly in the same time frame. So the act that renders the death penalty is the same act that you committed while costing somebody else money. Does that make sense? So you set alight, you hate your neighbor, a person hates their neighbor, they set alight his Picasso to cost him 20 million and burn down his house. And people warned him, they said, no, don't do it. This is the penalty. And he says he hates his neighbor, sets it alight. That gets him the death penalty. He was warned, there was witnesses, but he doesn't have to pay for the money because he's getting the death penalty, which is the greater penalty. But it's committed from one act. Has to be simultaneous. All right, and also, guys, it's not always a case of death penalty. It can be a case where the one is a monetary obligation and the other one is lashes, or the one is a higher monetary compensation versus a lower monetary compensation. It just means that if you pay the greater penalty, you don't the lower penalty by the same act is waived. And if there are two death penalties, the more severe one is given because you can't kill the guy twice. All right, on that very joyful note, I'm going to leave you guys to it. And I hope the share was decent. All right.
Yeah, very good.
All right.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Cheers, guys.